love my channel and would like to show your support, please click on the link below this video and become the patron of the Ushanka Show. For as little as $1, you can help us grow and create the new, interesting videos about the life in Soviet Union.
Greetings, comrades, and welcome back to Ushanka Show. Today we'll continue our conversation about our great leader, Comrade Stalin, Part 2. We finished the previous video on the topic of his exile in Siberia, when we had an affair with the young girl who was only 13-year-old, but to Stalin's credit, at that time in Georgia, it was okay to marry a 13-year-old girl, and for a guy, he can be married at the age of 15, so a 15-year-old boy can marry a 13-year-old girl, but Stalin was 34, but according to Georgian laws, if you marry to the 13-year-old girl, you'll be okay. So that was his exile in Siberia. Later, in 1907, some viewers wanted me to point it out, he went to London to join a big gathering of all the left parties, which at that time they had Bolsheviks and Mensheviks and some other people that were kind of on the same direction but not on the same page. And Bolshevik, you can translate as the people who are like a majority, большинство. The Mensheviks, it's like minority, but at that time actually there were more Mensheviks than Bolsheviks, and of course one of the biggest difference was that the Bolsheviks were for military resistance against the government, and Mensheviks wanted to achieve the goals normal political ways, like during election, winning the parliament and working the way up, and then Bolsheviks wanted just to make a big shortcut and be done with it. As I mentioned before, I'm not a historian or any professional person that studies history of the Soviet Union, so take all my information with a grain of salt, but I would definitely recommend you to read the book by Montefiore Simon, The Young Stalin. It is a quite interesting read. I need to do it myself. I started reading a little bit, and it's just really bizarre for me to read as a former Soviet pupil, to read this information that we never ever heard in Soviet Union, because the history is being written by victors or winners, so they will take out anything bad information they don't like. So the Soviet history was always very glossy to me. What we studied in schools, it was pretty much like the only path possible for the history to go was for the communism to win, and despite the struggles, the revolutionaries were like perfect people fighting the battle against evil, and good prevailed, evil lost, and here we are. So it's really weird to kind of read more in details about affairs that the revolutionaries had and struggles and how they hated each other. And of course there's a lot of characters that later just disappeared from the pages of Soviet history, like Trotsky, for example, and many others. They just disappeared literally. Even photos were edited. I call it Soviet Photoshop. So you could see there's a lot of photos of Lenin, Stalin, and there's other people around them that with years, when they were prosecuted and killed, they were just photoshopped out of those pictures, so like they never even existed, because a lot of famous photos of Lenin having a speech, I think it was in St. Petersburg, and you could see Comrade Trotsky staying there on the bottom of the podium. In the later photos, there's just Lenin by himself. There's no more Trotsky. He was removed. So now we're going to 1917. As you know, by then, Russia was in very bad shape. It lost the war of 1905 against Japan. Then World War I really took a toll on Russia. Its resources were depleted. People were tired of endless war, with the war with no positive outcome in sight. So army was kind of shaky, population was angry, stores were empty, and at the same time there were thin layer of population was doing great, making money on war. So there was a lot of unrest going on in Russia, especially in St. Petersburg and Moscow. And of course, just like any weak organism becomes more susceptible to viruses or diseases, same way the Russia was ready for some kind of change. And that's what happened in 1917 when October Revolution happened. And if you look across the board, across the spectrum, all the people that were helping Lenin, Stalin was the least probably educated person. So he was a go-getter, but there's a people who were book smart, and most of the revolutionaries, they were book smart. They constantly wrote articles, they discussed, come up with ideas, they had some education behind them. And there was Comrade Stalin that had no degree in anything. He didn't write any articles, but he was just doing things, learning things, and being a street smart. He watched everyone, and he grew up on the streets of Gori in a band, different gangs, young gangs, and he knew how to climb to the top. So he was just watching other people and making his mind remembering all the good things it was done to him from some people and bad things by other people. That's when he developed a real hate towards Leon Trotsky, because he was actually total opposite of Stalin. He was very bright, very smart. He was dressed sharp, so he was like a intelligentsia and its best versus this primitive, basic, speaking Russian with strong accent Stalin. So, and they didn't like each other a lot, and Trotsky treated Stalin like some dumb person, and of course Stalin just quietly kept the score, waiting for the right moment. And after October Revolution 1917, I said Stalin was helping Lenin, and as I mentioned before in my videos, it seems like Russian revolutionaries, they were quite optimistic about the reaction of the Russian population. It seems like the idea was like, hey, the country is ready for change. All we need to do is just to do this one last push to topple the system. And then on the ruins of the system, we're going to build a brand new world, which, even the famous song International was just saying just like that. We're going to destroy the old world to the ground and build a brand new world. And pretty soon they discovered that people weren't actually ready for a change. Peasants' uprisings started happening all over Russia, in Tambov region and Ukraine and other areas, because peasants were just not bright enough, I guess, to understand that now it's because of the great future coming. You just need to work for free and give up your harvest to the government so they can feed the workers and other people. So a lot of things were going wrong, and the economy collapsed. There was hunger, there were gangs, so things were going pretty bad. So there was a big reset when Lenin decided, okay, we need to regroup, and they started so-called NEP, New Economical Policy, which they allowed the private enterprise, and so this country kind of like did same thing what Gorbachev did later in 1980s, end of 1980s. They allowed private enterprise in order to restart the economy. Another big event that happened in Stalin's life was the letter from Lenin. So in 1922, Lenin wrote a letter to the gathering, Pismo Syezdu. So, the gathering of the members was called Syezd. And at that time, he was shot and was in really poor health, so he couldn't attend. So Lenin was just writing so-called letters, articles, explaining different things. So in that letter to the gathering in 1922, he wrote down, he pretty much dressed down all the members of the Soviet elite, Stalin, Trotsky, and others. telling what he liked and what he didn't like about them. Pretty much he was kind of laying the groundwork for the next leader of the Soviet Union, explaining to people, this is what I see, this is what you need to be aware of. And that letter was really critical towards Comrade Stalin. Lenin pretty much wrote that Stalin was too rude and should be removed. At that time, he was a general secretary of the Communist Party, I believe, the Stalin was, and that Lenin also mentioned that it seems like Stalin had concentrated unlimited power in his hands after becoming a general secretary, and Lenin wasn't sure that he could use that unlimited power properly. And you see, Stalin was watching, so all these years of this spending, a lot of time arguing and pushing different theories and voting. So Stalin kind of got the idea there's a lot of time and energy being wasted on democracy, and it's way easier to operate if you just have one person that makes all the decisions, and of course he would be the person who will do that. So after becoming general secretary, he started kind of concentrating more power in his hands. In that letter, Lenin was very critical to other people too, including Leon Trotsky, which it seems like he at that time, Trotsky was pretty much a number 2 personality in the Communist Party after Lenin, and he named Trotsky that as the most talented person in the current Central Committee. So although Stalin was general secretary, Lenin saw the potential of Trotsky, but he also didn't like that Trotsky was very self-indulged. He was almost like narcissistic, and he was very overconfident, but he considered him the most bright person who knew the theory. He was very talented about writing stuff. So of course it's Lenin's letter painted a big giant target on the Trotsky back for Stalin. This famous letter of 1922 was read in 1924 during the gathering to all the deputati, and Stalin was of course very upset, and like we say in modern days was butthurt, and he offered his resigning. He wanted to resign, but for some reason, who knows why, other members of the Central Committee objected that, so he remained as a general secretary. And later, of course, that letter was called bogus, and it disappeared. It was you could actually get in jail if you will have in possession of this letter. So that letter disappeared for years. It was a top secret paper, and no one could use it. Only after Khrushchev launched his attack on a Stalin heritage in end of 1950s after Stalin's death, that letter kind of came up again. But this is the major impact against Stalin, is the fact that his teacher and his kind of mentor Lenin mentioned that Stalin as a leader of the Soviet Union would be a bad idea. After the death of Lenin, of course, there's another thing that always bothers me about Soviet system or any socialist system. If we see any country that tries socialism, China, Cuba, North Korea, Soviet Union, no good system of transferring power. Like regular people, they're not involved whatsoever. If the leader dies, it's a top brass that decides who's going to be the next leader. In case of Northern Korea, it was basically like in a Tsar or the king, you transfer power to your kid. In Cuba, it was power transfer to the brother, Castro's. So same thing with Soviet Union is people don't decide who your next president. We kind of have like democracy here in America. We have voting, although we can talk about that a lot in length, but right now. So after the death of Lenin, there was a lot of these political games trying to, win other people votes to become a next leader. So of course the main candidate was Leon Trotsky versus Stalin, and actually some other guys like Zinoviev, Bukharin, they were pushing Stalin. So they're thinking like they're using him as a pawn. Like they knew they had no chance to win election against Trotsky, but if they will put Stalin in the front and they were behind his back doing all the work, like being a gray cardinal, that was their plan. But as a result, when Stalin became the general secretary of the Soviet Union, the ultimate leader of the country, one by one, all his proteges were removed and killed. Zinoviev, Kamenev, Bukharin. Trotsky was exiled first to Kazakhstan, then he had to leave the country, and then he ended up in Mexico. As you know, he got killed with ice pick. So Stalin was really to the point about going after his enemies, and he knew that the best enemy is the dead enemy. So anyone who ever did anything against him or knew anything about him was in the end purged, destroyed, and disappeared from this planet. Alright, comrades, I hope you enjoyed my story about Comrade Stalin, part 2. Soon we're gonna make another story. I was hoping to just do one short video, but then it just went downhill, and we're probably gonna have another at least number 3 and possible number 4 stories about Comrade Stalin. So as always, please put your comments and thoughts under this video. I enjoy discussion, and don't forget to like this video and maybe share with your friends so more people learn about life in Soviet Union. We'll talk to you later.